Welcome back to podcast 2. This is a series of 4 podcasts presented by myself, Paul Mansell, which I titled Snakes and Ladders of Stakeholder Engagement. The first podcast was around setting the stakeholder scene. This one is around the case tool. The third podcast will be case studies, and fourth, reflections. So for this podcast, we're going to be looking at the tool that I developed for the RICS publication back in 2014. The RICS publication presented 10 principles for stakeholder engagement, and we worked with the APM and its members to be able to bring together some best practice and shared some case studies. The case tool is based around some academic research that looked at various leadership gurus such as John Adaire's Inspirational Leadership, Warren Bennis, his leaders, Meredith Belden, Charles Handy, and Steve Covey. And what it did is picked up in the center of this conceptual diagram 3 core aspects. John Adair had used team, task, and leader. You can see the similarity, the leader, the task, and stakeholders. And that's within the outer bubble, the project complexity environment. And I'm going to take you through some of these aspects that might be helpful to you in your own projects. So I took that conceptual diagram and I broke it out into a 4-step approach. And I'll take you through a number of these steps, but clearly there isn't the time in this podcast to give you a really detailed view of it. Therefore, you can do your own research if you find it helpful. So each of these 6 phases are split down into 2 areas. You can see in the first one, my role in the team. You have to ask yourself, what is my leadership role and what's the team's role? And that starts providing you a context from which the other phases will fall into place. So there's a lot of writing on this slide, and I just want to share some high-level points. Step 1, there are clear ways of mapping roles and expectations, and that's not the focus of today's talk. Step 2, this is the most critical area, and I'll expand more on this in the case study. Step 3, this is around the definition of complexity, and this area is becoming better understood across project and program management. And this is a really important area to understand when we start talking about stakeholder engagement, as explained in the next slide. Now, please don't be put off by this Excel spreadsheet and the radar chart in the bottom right. It just gives you an idea of what sits behind my tool. It's based on detailed research, especially from systems integration studies. Now, I've used it in anger on a number of highly complex projects in telco transformation programs for Cisco. And it helped them understand the nature of the environment they were working in. The next step is number 4 of 6, and this probably seems more familiar to you. Steps 4 and 5 are the steps all projects will carry out. It's common practice, but too often only gets cursory tick-in-the-box responses. You'll be familiar with this power matrix. It's Mendelow's power interest grid from his Kent State University paper of 1991, and it's used across the APM and PMI. And it's a very good starting point. So this 101 of stakeholder engagement allows you to start plotting names or organizations onto a chart. The power of this is discussing it in a group so that you can better understand your team's views on these people's or stakeholder parties. So as I say, it's a starting point. And the grid on the right-hand side, you can then capture in a table, and that allows you to start saying, well, where are they now, and where do we need to get them to, and how are we going to get them there? So the final 2 steps deal with the plan of your stakeholder engagement, and then adapting the plan and approach through feedback learning loops. Now, today is not to talk about all the possibilities of these single or double learning loops, as they're often referred to. It's really to reflect on the fact this is a learning process, and no single person has the answer. And indeed, even when you think you're beginning to get this right, you need to keep challenging yourself and testing whether you have stayed alongside evolving opinions of stakeholders of your project. And the case study that I share with you of Grenfell will be a stark reminder of that. So in the next podcast, which will be podcast number 3, I'll talk about the 3 snakes: the what, the who, and the how. And I'll provide 3 potential solutions to those questions. One is around defining outcome success. The second one is around understand the different motivations and definitions of success. And lastly, developing a smart plan.